September 12th, 1997. Chatsworth, California. Just before the end of a Friday shift, a man who no longer works for Dunbar Armored walks up to the gate on Mason Avenue. He has a key that fits. The building behind him does not look like anything. It is a low industrial box in the San Fernando Valley, surrounded by warehouses and body shops and dry brown hills. There is no bank sign. There is no vault door visible from the street. That is the point. Armored car depots are designed to be boring, because boring is the cheapest form of security there is. Inside that particular box, on that particular night, sat close to $19 million in cash. Friday is the reason. An armored car company spends the week collecting from supermarkets, department stores, check cashing outlets, and bank branches across an entire region. And the end of the week is when that volume peaks. The money comes off the trucks at night. It gets counted, sorted, and staged for delivery to client banks on the next business day. For a few hours between the last route in and the first run out, a depot in an anonymous industrial park holds more physical currency than most bank branches will see in a year. Anyone who has worked inside the system knows exactly when those hours are. The man at the gate was Alan Pace III. He was 29 years old. For years he had worked for Dunbar as a regional safety inspector, which is a job that sounds like paperwork and is actually a set of keys. A safety inspector walks the building. He looks at fire exits and blocked hallways and where the cameras point. He asks why a door is propped open. He is expected to be everywhere, and nobody thinks twice when he is. That is the quiet vulnerability at the center of the cash transport business. The industry protects money in motion extremely well. Trucks are armored, crews are armed, routes are varied, and radio contact is constant. The weak point was never the road. It was the building, and specifically the people already inside it, because everything in that building is built to keep strangers out, and nothing in it is built to keep an employee from paying attention. Pace had been let go by the company earlier that year. He did not take it well, and he did not leave empty-handed. Before he walked out, he had done what almost nobody in the history of American robbery had been able to do. He had studied the target from the inside, on the clock, with permission. He knew where the cameras were mounted. More importantly, he knew where they were not. He knew which corridor the lenses could not reach. He knew the schedule of the crews and the moment the building went soft, which was the moment the guards came off the road and went on their break. He knew that the vault was open at night while cash from the day's routes was sorted and counted. And he had copied keys. Then he did the thing that separates a fantasy from a robbery. He went and got help. Pace did not recruit professionals. He did not go looking for men with records for armed robbery, because men with records for armed robbery are the first people the FBI interviews. He went back to the neighborhood he grew up in Los Angeles, and he brought in a small crew of childhood friends. They were not career criminals. They had known each other since they were kids. That single choice would keep the case unsolved for 2 years, because the traditional way police break a robbery is to squeeze the informant network, and this crew was not in it. They rehearsed. They walked the layout. Pace briefed them on where each guard would be standing and when. They arranged for a rented truck, an ordinary box truck of the kind that moves furniture on any Saturday in America. Nobody looks at one. On the night of the 12th, the crew came in behind Pace, through the door he had a key for, along the corridor the cameras did not watch. What happened next took roughly half an hour and involved not a single shot. The guards were caught in the middle of their break. They were coming off armored routes, unloading, relaxing, unarmed in some cases and unprepared in all of them. The crew moved through the room fast and loud, took control, and put men on the floor. Some of the guards were struck. All of them were bound. None of them were shot. And that restraint was not mercy, it was arithmetic. Pace understood that the difference between a robbery and a manhunt is a body. Take money and the FBI opens a file. Take a life and the FBI opens a war room and never closes it. 30 minutes is a long time to be inside a robbery. Bank jobs are measured in 90 seconds because 90 seconds is the honest estimate of how long you have before a patrol car turns the corner. The crew in Chatsworth was working off a different clock, and they knew it. No silent alarm was racing ahead of them because the people who would have triggered it were already on the floor. There were no customers. There were no windows onto a street. The nearest neighbors were closed warehouses and locked yards. Pace had not just picked a target. He had picked a target where time itself worked differently. Then they went for the vault, which was open, exactly as Pace had promised it would be. Here is the part that gets misunderstood. A vault full of money is not a scene from a movie where you sweep an arm across a shelf and walk out rich. Cash is heavy. A single United States banknote weighs about 1 gram, regardless of what is printed on it, which means $1 million in $20 bills weighs roughly 110 pounds. Cash is also traceable if you take the wrong kind. New bills come in sequential runs, and sequential serial numbers are a receipt with your name coming later. So they did not take everything. They took selectively, and they took fast. They loaded the used bills, the circulated notes in higher denominations, the money that had already been out in the world and had no clean paper trail behind it. They left cash on the floor. When the crew rolled the truck out through the gate and turned into the ordinary Friday night traffic of the valley, they were carrying $18.9 million. It remains the largest cash robbery ever committed on American soil. It is worth pausing on what that record means. The Brinks job in Boston in 1950, the one the newspapers called the crime of the century, took about $2.7 million. The Lufthansa robbery at Kennedy Airport in 1978, the one half of American organized crime folklore is built on, took several million in cash and jewels. Chatsworth beat all of it. It did so without a shot fired, without a standoff, and without a single member of the crew ever becoming famous. Most Americans have never heard of it. That is not an accident of history. It is a measure of how quietly it was done. The call went out the same night. By morning, the FBI was standing in the depot, and within hours, agents understood something uncomfortable. There was no forced entry worth the name. There was no alarm sequence that made sense. The crew had moved through the building as though they had a floor plan, because they had one. Investigators did not need a week to develop the insider theory. The building told them on the first walkthrough, which should have ended it quickly. Dunbar had a personnel file. Pace was in it. He had access, he had motive, and he had been fired months earlier. Agents looked hard at him almost immediately. And then nothing happened for 2 years. This is the part of the story that professional investigators find genuinely impressive, and it has nothing to do with the night of the robbery. Getting money out of a building is a logistics problem. Keeping it is a psychology problem, and almost everybody fails the second one. Consider what the crew was sitting on. Nearly $19 million in used bills, untraceable, in a country that in 1997 ran on cash far more than it does now. And they could not spend it. Not visibly. A man with no verifiable income cannot buy a house with a suitcase. Federal law required banks to report cash transactions over $10,000, and structuring deposits to stay under that line is itself a federal crime that the Treasury Department was specifically watching for. The money was real, and it was almost useless. There is a term for the work of turning that problem into usable wealth,
and it is an entire criminal profession of its own. Laundering cash at scale requires a business that plausibly handles a lot of currency, or a network of people willing to move small amounts quietly and repeatedly for years. 6 men from a Los Angeles neighborhood did not have that infrastructure. What they had was a stack of paper worth more than every business on their block, and the discipline to leave it sitting. The Bureau's approach to a case like this is patient and unglamorous. Agents build a financial picture of a suspect and then wait for that picture to disagree with itself. They pull property records, vehicle registrations, tax filings, and the ordinary paper that ordinary life generates. They talk to ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, cousins, and neighbors. They do not need a confession. They need one purchase that does not fit an income, and then they pull on it until something comes loose. Everything the FBI knew about robbery crews said this was where it would break. Somebody buys a car he cannot explain. Somebody's girlfriend talks. Somebody gets arrested on an unrelated charge and offers up the biggest thing he has to trade. 6 men, $19 million, 2 years of pressure. The odds against silence are enormous. 3 weeks after Chatsworth, on the other side of the country, the Cantor example arrived on schedule. On October 4th, 1997, a vault supervisor named David Gant loaded $17.3 million out of a Loomis Fargo depot in Charlotte, North Carolina. That crew went to Mexico, bought a mansion, bought a minivan, paid cash for furniture, and got themselves photographed. The FBI had most of them in months. 2 of the largest cash robberies in American history happened in the same season of the same year, and the difference between them was not skill on the night. It was patience afterward. The Chatsworth crew waited. Pace did not flee the country. There was no sudden fortune anyone could point to. Investigators had a name they liked and a theory they believed, and no evidence a prosecutor would take into a courtroom. What finally cracked it was not surveillance, and it was not a wiretap, and it was not a confession. It was paper. When cash is counted and bundled at a depot, it gets strapped. Those bands are printed and marked, and they identify where the money was processed. They are the one part of a cash haul that is not anonymous. Any professional would tell you the first thing you do is strip every band, burn them, and never let a strapped bundle out of your hands. One of the men involved, Eugene Hill, handed over cash in a business deal. He was moving into legitimate money, which is what everyone in this position eventually tries to do, and he passed a quantity of bills to another party. At least some of that cash was still in its original wrapper. That wrapper reached investigators. The wrapper pointed back to the depot. The depot pointed at a specific date and a specific shipment. And now the FBI did not have a theory anymore. It had a physical object connecting a man to $18.9 million. From there, the case did what cases do once the first link holds. Agents worked outward through associates and finances. They moved on the crew in 1999, roughly 2 years after the night on Mason Avenue. Once the first arrests came, the structure that had protected them started to work against them. These were not hardened professionals. They were friends, facing decades in federal prison, being told separately that the others were already talking. Several pleaded guilty and cooperated. Alan Pace III went to trial. In 2001, he was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. His co-defendants received sentences ranging from a handful of years to well over a decade, sorted largely by who talked first and who did not. The FBI recovered a portion of the money. Cars, property, cash that had been buried, cash that had been stashed with relatives. All of it came back in pieces over the following years. Only a portion. Investigators have said publicly that a large share of the 18.9 million was never accounted for. Estimates commonly place the missing amount at roughly half. Nobody has ever produced a satisfying explanation for where it went. It was not in a bank because it could not be. It was not spent conspicuously because the crew's entire operating principle was that it must not be. It is used American currency in higher denominations, printed before 1997, which means that if it was still sitting somewhere in a wall or a storage unit or a hole in the Southern California ground, it would still spend today. United States currency does not expire. Older series notes stay legal tender indefinitely, which is why a bill printed in the 1980s will still buy coffee. Whatever is left of that haul did not rot while it waited. It only got older. Every man who was charged went to federal prison. The rest of the money has never been found.